Okay, welcome to the Red Chair. Today we have another special guest, Kunal. Good to see you. Welcome to the Red Chair.
Thank you.
Who are you? Tell us your story. Entrepreneur, meditator, investor, but who's Kunal?
I'm just a guy hanging out in Portugal, enjoying the sun.
I wonder why.
Enjoying the beach. Yeah.
Tell us your story. I mean, how did you start? You're like a successful entrepreneur, but tell us more.
Yeah, I'm Canadian, born and raised. Went to school in Canada at the University of Waterloo. It's very well known globally as a top engineering school.
Absolutely.
And started my company in my fourth year. This was 15 years ago. So this is at a time before.
While you were still in university.
Yeah, I was still in school.
Did you drop out, or did you?
I didn't.
You didn't.
I didn't. I passed every class somehow.
That's well done.
I stopped going to class in the last couple of years.
Okay.
I managed to get through. And 15 years ago was a very different time to be starting a company as a 20-year-old. The support systems, the infrastructure, the incubators, the investors, the role models, nothing was there. Entrepreneurship wasn't seen as something to do right out of school 15 years ago. So it's amazing to see how today it's a real option and people strive for it and aspire to do that.
For sure.
Where 15 years ago it was, okay, you couldn't get a job, so maybe you should start a company.
And 15 years ago was not that long ago, right? I mean,
yeah.
I remember it very well, right?
Yeah.
So but what did you start?
Yeah, so the idea was to start a company. The actual product was secondary.
Right.
The idea was I and other colleagues wanted to work for ourselves. Mm-hmm. We did not want to work for a big company. And we started to prototype all sorts of ideas. Back then, BlackBerry was a big deal. This was before the iPhone existed. BlackBerry is a Canadian innovation.
For sure.
So we were heavily influenced by mobile technologies. And this is before 3G networks existed. We're on to 5G today. This was Edge 2G networks. Mm-hmm. And we came up with all these ideas of what might people do on their phones in the future. And the big insight for me was that mobile devices will be used as consumption devices, not just communication devices.
And where did you get that insight from?
Yeah, I did a study term in Hong Kong earlier, and I did a work term in the UK. And I saw people kind of 18 years ago using a phone. In a way, I never saw somebody use a phone in North America. In North America, we were just texting.
Yes.
And 18 years ago, like I was in Hong Kong watching TV on my phone in a subway under the river.
Right. And incredible, right? In Japan also was like that as well. Mm-hmm.
So that's where the inspiration came from, is that people are going to consume on these devices. And fast forward, we were right. Versus
this was right before the iPhone came out, right? 15 years ago. It's kind of when the iPhone came out, right?
Yeah. And we said, what are people going to consume? They're going to consume content. So we started to build applications and ideas and software and websites to put content onto phones. And it sounds very obvious today, but at the time, it was not obvious at all.
Because there was no platform. I mean, the BlackBerry, you could sort of type. There was actually a keyboard, which I loved, actually. Yes. It was way easier to type than the iPhone. Still today, I think it was easier to do the BlackBerry. But there was no content, basically. There were very few apps, really.
It didn't exist. Yeah. We launched some of the first apps on the BlackBerry device. We went to a large media company in Canada. I was still in school. They didn't know that I was still in school. And we showed them this idea of a magazine on a phone. And they said, okay, let's do it. And I still remember my second meeting with them. They said to me, okay, we'll try to find you some budget for this pilot. I hadn't even thought about pricing or how to charge for it. And they asked, how much do you want? And without pausing a second, I said, well, how much budget do you have? And this is me as a 20-year-old. And he said, we can probably get $10,000 for you. Is that enough? And I responded back with, no, we need $20,000. And that was the pricing strategy.
Just sort of ask for the double.
It's get what you can was the pricing model initially.
Right.
And then I asked them, what would success be with this pilot? And they said, if we had 5,000 people use it this year, that's success. And we had 20,000 people use it within 3 weeks.
Amazing.
And we were still in school. And that's when we said, okay, there's something here. People.
And what magazine was it? I mean, what kind of content did you produce for the BlackBerry at the time?
It's Canadian Business, Maclean's, so the big news and business publication in the country.
So the publication already existed. You were going to put it online, basically, into the phone, into a smartphone, which was not the iPhone. It was the BlackBerry.
Yeah, the iPhone didn't exist.
No, right.
And then Apple launched the iPhone a few months after we graduated, and then we were there. And then Time Magazine, CNN, Sports Illustrated, they saw what we were doing. They called us and said, hey, we want to be on these phones.
What was the name of the company?
The name of the company was Polar Mobile at the time.
Polar Mobile.
Yeah, it's gone through several changes, which we can talk about.
But so they found you, they found Polar Mobile in Canada, and they got in touch.
And we were 6 guys right out of school, 20, 21 years old, putting software together. And then we got them as our first major US client. And we were the 9th app on the App Store. And Apple featured it. And within 12 hours, we had 1 million downloads, and then everything stopped working.
Right. You were not ready. I mean, the infrastructure was not ready for the whole thing. And you're still called Polar at the time when you went into
it? We evolved. We had a pretty big pivot 5 years into the journey, and we became Polar from Polar Mobile because we had products for the web as well.
Right.
And then just recently, in the summer of 2022, we rebranded to Nova. And that was a brand we've been working on for a few years with some new products. So 3 kind of company brands, probably about 5 major chapters over the last 15 years.
Of course.
So I feel like a serial entrepreneur within the context of the company.
Same company.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit more, how was that first feeling of being there in the first sort of iPhone, one of the first apps? How did it all happen? How did Apple get in touch with you? And, just a bunch of kids, and suddenly you have an app in a thing that is new and that revolutionized the world.
Yeah, it was exciting and scary. It was exciting because we saw the potential, and it was scary because we didn't know what we were doing. And what was even scarier is we didn't know that we didn't know what we were doing.
Did they know what they were doing?
They didn't either. So it was interesting that the tolerance was so high for the software to have bugs and for it to not work. Because people download the app, it doesn't work.
Trying to see if the apps would work on the iPhone, right?
Yeah. We launched the first app for Wall Street Journal, the first app for Bloomberg, and we were trying to stream real-time financial information. And initially that didn't work. And people were okay with that because the technology was so new. There was an understanding. Where today, if that happened,
it's like unacceptable. Right?
Your business would be done.
Of course.
So in the early days of a new platform, what I learned from that is the need to just to try things out and not strive for perfection, because it's just technically almost impossible
to do it perfectly. In fact, you don't know because the customer might want something else, so you shouldn't really sort of stay in the cave and get out there and speak to customers, right?
Yeah.
And to providers. In that case, you had providers of content, and you had the customer, or the channel, which was these platforms.
Yeah, I moved to New York pretty early into my 20s, and I was there constantly, and just to spend time with clients. And that's the biggest thing I learned in running a B2B company is the client is king, more so than the users, than the team, than investors, than anybody else. It's all about the client. And I had this mantra of get a client and keep them for life. And that's how we were able to work with our clients to keep innovating and understand their problems and develop new products and continue to grow our share of wallet and revenue. And some of our clients have been clients with us now over 10 years. The people have changed over in the company, but our relationship and our software is still being used in lots of ways by them.
So how big is the company right now in terms of people and clients?
Yeah, so we have about 250 clients in 30 countries, about a third in North America, a third in Europe, and a third in Asia and Latin America. Team is actually nice and small, which I like.
Which is good.
Which is just under 50 people. And our team was actually bigger at a certain point, and then I realized if we can use software efficiently, that's the beauty of software is it scales, then we can build a high margin business. So that
that's
we had
the idea, right?
We had like a business model pivot probably about 3 years ago where we said, let's focus not just on top line, but bottom line. So we've been operating at 50% profit margins for the last couple of years.
Sounds good to me.
From this pivot to we need to take care of the bottom line and the top line, which is another thing that I didn't realize early on, but now I see the value in doing so.
This is interesting because actually at the time when you were starting, I mean, there wasn't that much funding, right? Particularly you were in Canada, you were just starting, but you had clients. So how did you approach, the fundraising, and how did you develop the company without, the climate that we have today? Even today with a kind of a crisis or a real crisis, there's still a lot of money, there's still a lot of capital, right? There's dry powder in the funds. But 15 years ago, there was no capital. There was very, very little capital available. Yeah. How did that go?
I feel I have like 15 years of fundraising experience now as an entrepreneur, and I've done it all from angel investors to VC investors to recently private equity investor to bank debt. So I've done all types of funding. And the headline that I have, which is it's controversial, is a lot of entrepreneurs, say and complain that fundraising is hard. I believe fundraising is actually very easy, and is that
if you have the right product,
if you have an investable business,
right,
people will see that and write you a check.
Of course.
And if you don't have an investable business, people will see that and not write you a check. So, like anything in life, if we have to try too hard to do it, then we're probably not doing the right thing, or we don't have the right skills or setup to do it. So I don't buy into this notion that entrepreneurs should spend a lot of effort and energy fundraising.
If you need a lot of effort, maybe there's something wrong, right?
There's something wrong.
And so did you what was the first capital you had?
So I was kind of 6 weeks out of school, and we were all out of school and living at home. So there's no costs really to the business. Mm-hmm. We had some client revenue. I took a bit of money from my parents, so there wasn't much costs. I remember I had a meeting with a peer-to-peer group of CEOs, and that was very helpful. So I found community, all traditional businesses. And they said to me, how are you going to pay your people? And I said, I don't need to. We're all 21. We live at home. We don't have expenses. And they're like, no, you need to pay your people. Exactly. And I was like, really? Yeah. I'm like, okay, how do I pay them? And they're like, you should get an investor. I'm like, how do I do that? Well, you need to go talk to people. So I called my lawyer right after that session, and I said, can you introduce me to some investors? And one of his clients was an investor. So we had a drink the next day, shared him the product. We talked a lot about his actually entrepreneurial journey.
In Canada.
In Canada. And then that night he called me and he said, I'll do it. And I said, do what? He said, I'll invest. I'm like, okay. And he said, how much? I said, I don't know. He's like, okay, well, come up with a business plan and then come back to me. So the next week I went to his house, and then I showed him kind of a plan, and then he tore it apart, and he's like, I said, I think I need 500,000. He's like, I think you'll need more. Take 800,000. I'm like, okay. And then we talked about evaluation, and I was like, okay, I need the money because I need to start hiring people. And then he just wrote me a check on the spot. There was no paperwork.
For 800,000?
For a portion of it.
A portion.
I think it was 150.
Okay, and then you had to raise the rest.
No, he was doing the whole round, but he wrote me a check on the spot so I can go start getting to work. Right. And then it took 3 months to get all of the paperwork in place.
I mean, 800,000 15 years ago, that was quite a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
It was a very good investor.
It lasted me 9 months.
That was quick. For someone that didn't need money?
It's easy to spend money. And in B2B, I didn't realize clients take a long time to pay you. So we ran out of money 9 months later.
Quite often they take a lot of time to actually onboard you and actually start using, and then to pay you is something else, right?
Yeah. So the spreadsheet lied to me. The spreadsheet said that I wasn't going to run out of money, and it lied. And I was still so naive that I'm like 22 years old now, and I said to the team, hey, we ran out of money, but don't worry. And we were like 14 people, and 2 people quit the next day. And that's when it hit me. Right? Yeah, I was like, okay, I might be comfortable with this level of risk, but not everybody else is. So,
and that's normal, right? Because not everybody's going to be, a leading entrepreneur and have that. But you need all sorts of people in your company, right?
Yeah. So those early days, because there's no role models, there's no examples. So I had to learn it by doing it the hard way. I went to my investors and I said, I ran out of money. And they're like, how come you didn't tell us sooner? Exactly. And I was like, some people quit and I don't know what to do. And then they wrote me a check on the spot, and they brought some more investors to the table. And then a year later, same thing, ran out of money again.
But did you tell them in advance?
I told them in advance. Good. We raised about $1 million each time. And then a year later, I was like, okay, I think we need some more money. So then we did a VC fundraise. And the way we met that VC was really interesting. Is I'd been introduced to him through a business conference, and I liked the guy, and I didn't pay much attention to what he did. And I just went to ask him for business advice. And he had B2B experience, and I was like, how do I do sales? How do I do pricing? And just normal business, operations questions I asked him. And then at the end, he's like, so how are you funding this? I'm like, I don't know yet. And then a few weeks later, we talked again. And then a few months later, we did a deal.
You settled. This was a Canadian VC?
Canadian VC.
Canadian VC.
Yeah, they primarily were investing in the US, but yeah, we were one of the
And at the time, so 15 years ago or 14 years ago, what kind of terms were you getting? Like you sort of got a capital raise of $1 million or 800,000.
Yeah.
For what percentage?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
I don't remember the percentages, but
broadly,
I'd say the focus is a bunch of guys in their 20s, we didn't really care about the cap table. We didn't really care about valuation. It was more about like, we want to just do it. So it was the passion for growing the business and trying to make it work. That was the satisfaction that
But
we
was
were
it
after.
very different from terms today? I mean, you don't have to share, of course, the numbers, but the point of the question is it different from today? I mean, were the terms different back then, 15 years ago, than what they are now?
I'd say they were. So I'd say today investors have a lot more protection, preferred shares and things of that nature, where our first round was all common shares, same shares as me.
All common shares, right.
It wasn't until, and first few rounds, it was until we had a VC investor that we structured.
Right.
The
so when
investors got some
institutional capital
protection.
came in, then there was a
But up until
regular
then,
term
kind
sheet
of, I think we had
thing.
3 million invested, all the same. So there wasn't any investor protection like there is now. I would say kind of board or investor kind of control, veto rights, that came much later as well.
Mm-hmm.
So initially, I may not have owned more than 50% of the company, but I had essential control over decision making. And that's how it was. It was very much presented as a lot of trust in the idea, but a lot of trust in me as the founder. And that's reflected in the legal framework for the business, which I don't see the case today as much.
Right. But at the same time, currently, normally, entrepreneurs have more percentage, right?
Correct.
They stay with more percentage until much later on.
Yeah.
Although the VCs protect the downside, let's put it this way.
Yeah, that's why I don't think the percentage and valuations matter nowadays, because people don't realize how much protection there is for the investors, and it's a very different mindset.
Yeah, of course, if you have the upside, if things go well, if you have more percentage, that's great. What you're saying is that if things go wrong, the entrepreneur might find itself not having a lot or
and
nothing.
Let's be honest, the chances of things going well are very low. When we look at all the startups, all the companies out there, not all of them are going to do well.
For sure.
And that level of, I guess, humility and grounding has been helpful for me. And having gone through it over 15 years and lots of pivots, I understand how hard it is.
You think so? When you started, of course, you were saying very naive and full of ideas, but you didn't know the journey. You were just learning by doing. You think people know nowadays, entrepreneurs, they know what they should expect, or there's still a lot of naivete and people are doing the same mistakes? Has the entrepreneur evolved?
Yeah, I think the type of founder entrepreneur today is very different than the type I am or the type 15 years ago. And I think a lot of people today are starting companies that probably shouldn't be starting companies.
Shouldn't be starting.
And I think you see that by burnout, by mental health issues, by a lot of other challenges that are happening.
And why are they doing that? Why are the people starting so many businesses? Is there like too much money available to start businesses maybe?
I mean, it's cool. It's sexy. Depending on which part of the world you live in, it's almost an expectation. Mm-hmm. There's this shiny reward opportunity presented. But it's really, really hard to get there, and it takes a lot.
The odds of making it are still very low, right?
Yeah, and it takes a lot of mental, emotional, I'll say, skill to navigate the journey. And it's not just about getting to some destination, and if you kill yourself along the way, what's the point?
So what have you learned on a personal level? Has in that journey and other entrepreneurs you've seen? You're also an investor. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
What have you learned personally on how to adapt to all these stressful times of raising capital, increasing your top line and your bottom line, and dealing with employees and so on?
I've become a pretty big meditator. About 8-10 years ago, I started to meditate, and that as a practice has really helped me get to know myself better and then approach not just business, but life with a bit more ease and a little less friction. And that's a journey that I'm still on. I started teaching about 5 years ago and sharing my passion for it. And
teaching meditation.
Teaching meditation. I was a mental health advocate for about 5 years, part of boards and charities, and doing a lot of fundraising in Canada and the US. So it's what I learned kind of the hard way is the need to take care of ourselves. And then as a leader, the need to create an environment that takes care of others as well.
So you're a little bit ahead of the whole thing about mental health, because now everybody talks about it in the last, I'd say, 2-3 years because of the pandemic and so on. But this has been an issue forever, right? That's always been an issue for entrepreneurs. and the people that surround them, including investors, I must say,
Yeah.
where it's very stressful. It's a very stressful environment, and you found that out through your own personal experience, and meditation was or is the answer in your case.
It's this curiosity, this understanding of myself. Meditation is a tool to understand myself. Why do I feel this way? Really, emotional intelligence. We think of it as and talk about it as a concept. It's taught in schools now, most places in the world, which is great to young people. But we need tools to be in touch with our emotions. And there's so many business decisions that are impacted by the founder's emotions, and it's unreal how connected it is.
And what are the signals that entrepreneurs and others should look for in themselves that things are not going well, or that things are a little bit out of control or starting to spiral out of control?
So I think there's physical health markers, and those are the obvious ones around sleep, around nutrition, around exercise, and the common sense physical health markers. And if I can't take care of my body, how am I going to take care of my business?
Mm-hmm.
And the two are connected. And then there's the mental health markers, the emotional health markers, which is if I'm sitting down for a meal, or if I'm sitting down with a parent or sibling or friend, am I mentally there, or am I just physically there, or am I mentally distracted? Meditation actually is really challenging because you have to sit with yourself. Can I sit with myself for 10 minutes, or is it too much for me to handle?
Do nothing, right? Supposedly, right?
Observe, observe what's going on mentally, emotionally, even physically. These are simple kind of tests that throughout a day allow any of us to become aware of what is my state. And we have to take responsibility. We have to take ownership of our own state. We can't wait for a doctor checkup, or wait for a friend to check in on us, or a teacher or manager in the workplace, or spouse. It really is our life. The most important relationship we have is the one with ourselves, and being in tune and in touch with that. And it's easy when you're building something to lose touch with that and get focused on what am I building, what am I doing, what's happening here, what's happening there. And the harder work is to be in touch with myself. And if I'm in touch with myself, then I start to make better decisions.
And you mentioned also about others and taking care of the team. What are the things that you learned? So you lost a few employees at the beginning. They got scared. There was no money. But then, the company started growing. It was challenging, but things went very well and you're very successful. But how did people react in the journey, and what did you learn as a leader of people, as a CEO, founder and CEO, how to manage that growing team and those expectations?
The way that I feel, or any leader feels, is going to get reflected in the culture. And it's best to be intentional with it versus accidental. So for example, like I became a deep meditator, and then we all started to meditate as a team. I started to get into wellness practices and started to bring a lot more balance into my life. And then naturally we started to create practices and policies that supported that. We experimented with a 4-day work week for a few years before it was cool.
How did that go?
It went great.
Yeah. So people liked it, and it stuck. It's still 4-day work week.
We changed it to flex hours, so letting people work really whenever they want, and that's we moved to a work from anywhere, which at the start of the pandemic was obvious for everyone, but we've actually been doing that for like 6-7 years now. We have offices, but people come into the office a few days a week, work from home a few days a week. So we've been ahead of the curve on that, and then kind of I think that was the future of work 1.0 is work wherever you want. I think future of work like 2.0 is work whenever you want. And that's something that we're
Of course, there's deadlines sometimes, right? There's deadlines in the middle of that thing.
Yeah, and if you hire well and if you trust people, then they will take ownership. And
right.
That's,
with the right kind of people, you can do that, right?
And the right environment and the right leadership that brings out the best in people.
Right.
So that's kind of the current experiment, which is giving people the flexibility to work when they want. And that means moving to more of an asynchronous culture. We don't have very many meetings at all. I mean, when people joined the company, they said, I knew you said this, but I didn't actually believe it, but now I see it. Where people are having maybe 1 or 2 hours of meetings a week. So if you can imagine that.
And how does it work when you have people which are less experienced? Do you think there's a need to be physically or a little bit closer and just learning with others, or does it depend on the industry? What's your view on this?
Yeah, so we're a relatively small company, B2B, so we actually don't hire inexperienced people.
Right.
Maybe partly for that reason. Like everybody is intermediate to senior on our team. Everybody knows what they're doing. They have exposure to the industry, and that allows us to operate at a very high profit margin. Now, other environments are going to have different setups based on the type of talent. But I think the message there is alignment. Like align the culture to the types of people that we want to hire to the business objectives we're trying to achieve.
And do you feel that compensation has taken a backseat, or is it still very important? And on top of that, you need to provide that that sort of flexible working environment for the team.
I think not enough attention is being paid to compensation, and I think of recognition as the umbrella to compensation. There's a lot of other ways that people's work and time is recognized that's not related to their paycheck, and I think people value those other aspects more than they realize. So we don't pay above average. We probably pay maybe even slightly below average. And our average tenure right now is 7.5 years, which for a tech company is unheard of, that people are going to be there
really
that
enjoy
long.
working.
So there's something they're getting of value
right
beyond their paycheck. So I think every company needs to put more attention to recognition versus only compensation, and be intentional about it, not accidental.
Super interesting. And tell me, so why did you come to Lisbon? What brought you here?
The sun, the water, lifestyle, and the nice people. I've never lived in Europe, and I've been here for just over a year now and absolutely love it. The expat community is vibrant. The Portuguese approach to life is inspiring, coming from North America. I'm starting to get tapped into the tech ecosystem here, and I see a lot of potential. So it's an exciting moment for Portugal on the world stage, and I'm excited to be here at this moment.
Well, it's great to have you here. Kunal, it was a pleasure to have you at the Red Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good to see you.